You might recognize some of the elements I covered in the previous more generalized attacks section, but these should be specific to particular vendors. First, I'm going to talk about Cisco. So basically, here's your Cisco O-Day. Well, now it's 2004, so it's 2.5 years old, and it's still vulnerable. Basically, what happens is that Cisco IP phones run skinny for their signaling, which runs over TCP. TCP is vulnerable to a reset attack. If you forcibly close the phone's signaling connection with a spoofed reset packet, it performs a full device reboot. So this causes the device to go out to the TFTP server again, download its config, download its image file, all of that kind of stuff. And obviously, the phone's not providing service while it's doing this. It's booting. So this behavior is current as of the most recent firmware, which was released about a month ago. This was disclosed by Cisco themselves in April of 2004. Well, at least they disclosed the vulnerability to the reset attack. They didn't seem to care that the phone reboots whenever you perform this attack against it. And it's not mentioned at all in the advisory. The reason this is so bad is that, first of all, it provides an attacker with a means to perform the device configuration disclosure stuff I talked about a minute ago. Also, TFTP is unauthenticated, so if you're able to own the local segment and you're doing some ARP poisoning, things like that, and you can tell the phone to reboot, you can then imitate the TFTP server and hand it your own configuration file, hand it your own firmware image, things like that. Cisco's mechanism for deciding whether or not it's going to download signed configuration files versus unsigned is whether or not there's a certificate authority essentially on the server. If you're imitating the server, you don't need to provide one. It'll go after the unsigned. So some tools to do this. Obviously, TCP kill from Long's tool suite. The vendor's response to this was that they addressed the issue in accordance with the IETF's recommendation, which basically tells you to challenge the reset by sending a reset ACK and then expect another reset. Really, all that does is make the attack a little bit more difficult. TCP kill plows right through that. It doesn't really care. So the attack is slightly harder, but by much. Also, what Cisco needs to do is have the phones perform like they do if you perform an ICMP unreachable reset. They basically just reconnect the session. So it behaves slightly differently between an ICMP reset versus a spoofed reset, TCP reset attack. So the next one is a vendor called FiWin. This one's a little more recent than 2.5 years. They make a Wi-Fi phone that speaks SIP and Skype. They left the VxWorks debug console open, and this happens all the time. You wouldn't believe how many of these phones coming out have this enabled. So, in addition to that, they have a hard-coded username and password of 1 and 1. So, yeah, that's fun. Like I said, this is kind of indicative of the current. This kind of thing happens all the time. A lot of these vendors are just new to the market, new to this industry, and they don't lock down their devices before shipping. I personally don't focus too much on endpoint devices because there's another researcher named Sean who actually focuses almost entirely on endpoint devices, so I try to stay focusing on protocols and infrastructure and things like that. I think he's actually speaking at NoCon Name yesterday. Dropped a couple very similar to this. So basically you tell it to the device, you log in with 1 and 1, and at that point you've got VxWorks console access. You can look at RAM, you can format the disk, you can do whatever you want to do. It's wide open, essentially. So all you need to do this is a telnet client. So far there's been no vendor response, both to him and myself. We've both tried. there's so some things you can do if you happen to actually be using this phone to mitigate it. You can kind of fix the problem by disabling the console port. You log in and you issue this command, and it basically no longer lets you log in, but you can still connect to the port and see debug messages. So it's not a complete fix. Also, you can try updating the firmware, but this currently has some issues also. Now there's no updated firmware, and even if it were available, you can't load it on the phone because it requires a proprietary USB cable that you can only get from FiWin, and they don't sell it. So even if you were able to get firmware, right now you can't load it. So that's pretty much it for that particular attack. Next is the third and final section of my talk, where I'll be discussing some of the mitigation techniques that I talked about and what problems those have. No audio. That's okay. Basically, he's saying he's cleaned up his life. He's a better man, and this guy makes some offhanded snipe comment. So first, I'm going to talk about encrypting the media channel. That and encrypting the signaling channel are one of the ones that I hit on over and over again. So, right now, this was suggested in response to eavesdropping the media primarily. So, yes, there's a standard way to do this. It's called SRTP, which stands for Secure RTP. But right now, not that many devices yet really support it. There are a few. This is definitely moving in the right direction. But one of the reasons that not many devices support it is there's no standard way to negotiate or send the set for the media. There's a couple of different protocols proposals on the table, which is kind of hindering adoption, and people are waiting to see which one becomes the dominant one before they actually implement. There's the issue with this is, even if you employ one of these ways to do it, it's done in the unencrypted signaling anyway. So it's kind of a moot point. If you can see the signaling and see all this being set up, you have the keys. So then you can just decrypt the media anyway. So one of those, I think it's called S descriptions, recently made it to RFC status. It's a little bit ahead of the others, but those also have their own problems, and I'm not going to get into that too much. Phil Zimmerman's come up with a modified version of SRTP called ZRTP, which does a Diffie-Hellman key exchange actually in the media channel. Personally, I think he's got it right. It's an excellent protocol. But the problem with that is it's not going to fly very well in the business space because of something that was mentioned in one of the Turbo Talks yesterday called CALIA. Basically, that's the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. And what it does is requires telcos to provide an easy and convenient way for the feds to tap your phone call if and when they need so. A lot of businesses are going to have to start complying with this, and ZRTP is encrypted end-to-end. There's no mechanism, as far as I'm aware, to tap the call midstream. So it's a great protocol, but I'm afraid it might not get a whole lot of adoption. And finally, you can wrap the entire thing in IPsec or TLS, which is what a lot of people do, but those both have their own problems. I'll talk about that in just a second. So the next one is encrypting the signaling. Basically, there's no standard way to do this yet. Basically, you can use TLS or IPsec, but IPsec tends to not be scalable very well for VoIP. And it also has issues with call setup times. In VoIP, like I said, it's very sensitive to latency and quality of service. If it takes 5 seconds for you to actually start talking to someone over the phone after they've picked up, that's pretty much unacceptable to a phone user. And TLS has its own issues. A lot of people have problems with it because it's not encrypted end-to-end. If one of the hops is compromised, you've got completely unencrypted signaling at that hop. And there's also issues with trust. There's no global PKI to kind of manage inter-network VoIP exchanges between, say, your VoIP provider and your buddy's VoIP provider. So, authenticating all signaling messages, I hit on that a lot too. In a lot of cases, this is going to require that the protocol be fixed. It also, the nature of VoIP kind of requires that some signaling has to be unauthenticated because you have to be able to initiate calls from untrusted parties. That's kind of the nature of phone systems in general. Whitelisting your known senders may work for you, but not for a call center or for a business. They have to receive unknown calls. And you can kind of band-aid the problem by wrapping the signaling in an authenticating protocol like IPsec or TLS, but I already mentioned the issues with those. So I touched on fixing the protocols here as well as earlier, so I'll talk about that next.
I was thinking maybe instead of houses.
And I also still don't have. Yeah.
It's better in a lot of ways.
That one's short, so I'll redo it.
I was maybe instead of houses we could live in teepees because it's better in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we should all live in teepees. So, fixing the protocols. There's really no immediate solution for that. It's kind of more consuming with open and standards-based protocols because you kind of have to convince the committee that there's a problem, and deliberation among them on what to do about it is going to take time. It may be a little faster or easier with proprietary protocols because you're talking directly to your vendor, but you still have to convince them that there's a problem. A lot of times they just want to turn a blind eye and not realize that there's an issue. So also I said don't trust caller ID. That's fine if you're a VoIP service provider or an automated system provider because you can implement that in your configuration. Unfortunately, that's not so good for end users because they've been trained since the early 90s or so when caller ID was introduced that the information that shows up on your phone is who's calling you. Okay, apparently I am out of time. I've got my 2 slides left, so I'm going to run through these. But that's it for that one. Unfortunately, there's no open source hard phone firmware as far as I'm aware. So that's pretty much out. You have to use your vendor's hard phone. And like I said earlier, demanding resilient devices doesn't really work very well. Rate limiting, low rate floods are still effective. It only takes one call setup message, a couple of seconds to make your phone ring constantly. The phone, but it's DOSing the user. And don't use TFTP or FTP. A lot of times there's no alternative. That's just what the vendors use, so you're kind of stuck there. So basically the overall VoIP landscape is fairly insecure. It's got a lot of fundamental protocol issues, and there's work being done to secure these things and fix these things, but the rapid adoption of VoIP and creation of new features, new phones, things like that, is far outpacing what's being done to secure them. And I don't have any time for Q&A. I'm out of time. But if you want to find me afterwards, I'll be happy to discuss with anyone. Thank you.